400 years of peace had made humanity soft, or so the galaxy believed. Dr. Owen Cross didn't think much about war as he cataloged alien plant samples in his laboratory. His fingers moved through holographic data with practiced ease while rain hammered against the transparent dome above him. Meridian 7 research station orbited a water world, and sometimes the storms were so beautiful he forgot to work. "Owen, you seeing this?" His assistant Barry poked his head through the doorway, face pale. Owen looked up from a particularly interesting moss sample. "Seeing what?" "The feeds. From Red Point Colony." The hologram flickered and changed. Owen's moss disappeared, replaced by scenes of destruction that made his stomach turn. Buildings collapsed under green energy blasts. People ran through streets while something hunted them from above. Ships shaped like talons descended through smoke and fire. "What am I looking at?" Owen whispered. "First contact with the Scalth Imperium." Barry's voice shook. "They hit Red Point 3 hours ago. 2 million people lived there." Owen watched a child stumble in the street. A reptilian soldier, easily 8 feet tall, raised its weapon. The feed cut to static before he saw what happened next. He was glad for that mercy. "Where's the Coalition fleet? Where's the response?" Barry shook his head. "Diplomatic channels. They're trying to talk." Owen had spent 30 years studying alien life. He understood biology, behavior, evolutionary pressure. The creatures he saw on those screens weren't there to talk. They moved like predators. Every gesture spoke of species that had evolved to hunt and kill. "Get me a connection to my daughter," Owen said quietly. "She's on Earth. The lag will be, I don't care about the lag. Get me Nora." While Barry worked on the connection, Owen pulled up everything he could find about the Scalth Imperium. Not much existed in human databases. A reptilian species from the Galactic East. Aggressive expansion over the past century. Conquered 17 species. The Coalition had labeled them a regional concern and moved on. Regional concern. Owen stared at the burning buildings on his screen. The holocom chimed. Nora's face appeared, older than he remembered. When had she gotten those lines around her eyes? Oh, right, when her mother died. 5 years ago now. Time moved strangely when you lived on different worlds, Dad. What's wrong? Your military archive, right? You have access to old files? Nora frowned. I'm a librarian for historical documents. Why? Red Point is burning. Something called the Scalth Imperium is killing everyone. The Coalition is talking instead of fighting. Owen leaned closer to the camera. I need you to look up human military history. The real history, not the approved versions. Dad, we've been peaceful for 4 centuries. There's nothing. Look anyway, please. Nora studied his face for a long moment. You're scared. Terrified, Owen admitted. These things, they're not like other species. I can see it in how they move. They're hunters, and they think we're prey. After Nora's image faded, Owen went back to watching the feeds. More colonies reported attacks. The Scalth moved with coordinated precision. They understood logistics, supply lines, strategic value. This wasn't a raid. It was a calculated military campaign. Captain Iris Holt brought her transport ship into Meridian 7 2 days later. Owen had met her before, a calm woman who moved cargo and passengers across human space. She didn't look calm anymore. I need anyone who wants to evacuate, Iris said when Owen reached the docking bay. Red Point survivors are saying the Scalth are coming to all outer colonies. Meridian 7 is just a research station. We're not valuable. Iris laughed, but it sounded wrong. They killed a colony of 2 million people for being there. You think they care about value? Owen helped load refugees for 6 hours. Families clutched small bags of belongings. Children cried. Nobody understood why this was happening. Humanity had been peaceful. They traded fairly. They helped other species. Why would anyone attack them? Because we're weak, Owen thought but didn't say. Because 400 years without war made us forget that kindness only matters to kind species. On the 7th hour, alarms screamed through the station. Ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. Scalth vessels, 20 of them, moving toward Meridian 7 like sharks to blood. Everyone on board now, Iris shouted. We're leaving. Owen grabbed his research and ran. Behind him, the station's automated systems tried to send diplomatic greetings in 40 languages. The Scalth answered with weapons fire that tore through the dome where Owen had worked that morning. Rain from the water world below began flooding in. The transport ship pulled away as green energy blasts carved the station into pieces. Owen pressed his face against the window and watched his laboratory, His samples, his life's work become debris. They didn't even try to communicate. Someone sobbed nearby. No, Owen thought. They didn't need to. They'd already said everything by attacking. The Scalth had looked at humanity and seen something helpless. Something that could be taken. As the transport jumped to faster-than-light speed, Owen pulled up the casualty reports. Red Point Colony, 2 million dead. Newton Station, 300,000. Harmony Settlement, 500,000. The numbers kept growing. His holocom chimed. Nora's face appeared and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Dad," she said, "I found something in the archives. Something about why humanity really stopped fighting wars." She paused, "And I found something called Protocol Sleeping Giant. You need to see this." Owen leaned forward. Outside the window, stars blurred past. Somewhere behind them, the Scalth continued their hunt, and somewhere ahead in old files on an ancient world, humanity's forgotten past was about to become very important to its future. The Coalition diplomatic ship arrived at the Scalth border 3 days after Red Point burned. Ambassador Trill led the delegation personally, all 6 of his insectoid legs clicking against the polished floor as he prepared his speech about peace and mutual understanding. He'd resolved conflicts between species for 60 years. This would be no different. The Scalth commander, Raxthor, listened to the entire speech. Then he ate Ambassador Trill alive on a live broadcast to the entire galaxy. Owen watched the execution from a refugee center on the colony world haven. Around him, 2,000 survivors from various attacks sat in shocked silence. The screaming stopped after 3 minutes. The broadcast continued for 10 more, while Raxthor explained in perfect galactic common that humanity and its allies were prey species. The Scalth Imperium hunted. That was the natural order. "Turn it off," someone pleaded. Nobody moved to turn it off. They needed to see what they were dealing with. Iris found Owen an hour later staring at a blank wall. "The Coalition is voting on sanctions. Sanctions." Owen's voice came out flat. "They ate their ambassador and they're voting on sanctions. What else can they do? The Coalition hasn't fought a war in 2 centuries. Their defense forces are for show. Parades and ceremonies." Iris sat beside him. "We're the only species that remembers real combat, and that was 400 years ago." Owen's holocom buzzed constantly with messages from other scientists. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How did the Scalth biology work? What were their weaknesses? Owen had been studying the footage obsessively. The way they moved, their social structure, the chemical signals they used to communicate. "They can smell fear," he said suddenly. "Look at the attack patterns. They always hit the most frightened groups first. It's not random. They're hunting by terror. Wonderful. They're literally fear predators." Iris rubbed her temples. "The Coalition wants us to evacuate all outer colonies. 40 worlds, 300 million people. It'll take months." "We don't have months." They didn't. The Scalth hit 4 more colonies simultaneously the next week. The attack showed clear military strategy. They isolated targets, cut supply lines, and overwhelmed defenses before anyone could respond. The Coalition sent strongly worded messages. The Scalth sent back recordings of human civilians being processed for food. Owen threw up the first time he saw those recordings. The second time he just felt cold. "I want to fight," a young man said at a refugee meeting. "I'll volunteer. Where do I sign up?" "There's nowhere to sign up," an official explained patiently. "Humanity doesn't have a military anymore. We have civilian defense forces for accidents and emergencies. The Coalition handles actual combat." "Then ask the Coalition to let us help." They did ask. The Coalition members listened politely to human volunteers and thanked them for their enthusiasm. Then they explained that humanity had been peaceful for so long they wouldn't understand modern warfare. Better to leave it to species with recent combat experience. An elder council member, a floating jellyfish creature called Prime Harmonizer, addressed the human delegates directly. "Your species chose peace 4 centuries ago. You built beautiful things. You advanced science and art. You became teachers and healers. This is your nature now. Accept it." Owen watched the speech from his temporary quarters. He'd been reassigned to Haven Colony as a civilian advisor on Scalth biology. His daughter Nora had sent him files, enormous compressed archives of human military history. He'd been reading them for days. "They're wrong," he muttered. "We didn't choose peace. We chose to stop before we destroyed ourselves." The files told a story the official histories didn't include. Humanity's last war had been fought with weapons that made current coalition technology look primitive. Artificial intelligence merged with human neural networks, ships that could crack planets, biological weapons that made the Skalth look gentle. The war ended not because humanity became enlightened, but because both sides looked at what they'd created and felt horror. The weapons were sealed away. The technology was locked in archives. And humanity collectively agreed to forget they'd ever been that dangerous. But the files remained, and buried in them Nora had found Protocol Sleeping Giant. Owen's holocom chimed. His daughter's face appeared, dark circles under her eyes. "I showed the protocol to some people in government," Nora said without preamble. "They're terrified. Of the Skalth? Of us. Of what we'll become if we activate it." Nora looked away from the camera. "Dad, the things I've read, what we did to each other in that last war. Maybe the coalition is right. Maybe we're better off staying peaceful." Owen pulled up his files, images of Red Point, of Meridian 7, of colonies burning and children running and people dying because they couldn't fight back. "How many dead now?" he asked. 4.2 million confirmed. Estimates say actual number is twice that. And climbing every day. Owen met his daughter's eyes through the camera. "I've been analyzing Skalth psychology. They're not going to stop. They've categorized us as prey. In their worldview, prey exists to be consumed. We can surrender or run or beg, and they'll still hunt us until we're extinct. So what do? Protocol Sleeping Giant requires unanimous vote from all human colonies, every single settlement, station, and ship. It's designed that way on purpose, to make sure we really mean it." Owen took a breath. "Start the vote." The referendum spread through human space like wildfire. People voted on data pads, on ship consoles, in meeting halls and living rooms. The question was simple. Activate Protocol Sleeping Giant? Yes or no? Prime Minister David Walsh gave a speech before the final count. He looked old, tired, like the weight of 400 years pressed on his shoulders. "Our ancestors sealed away the weapons because they knew what we were capable of. They feared our own potential for destruction more than any external enemy. If we activate this protocol, we're not just bringing back old technology. We're bringing back an old version of humanity, one that knew how to kill very, very efficiently." Walsh paused. "I don't know if we can put that part of ourselves back to sleep once we wake it." The votes came in. Colony after colony, station after station. Engineers voted yes. Teachers voted yes. Artists and musicians and poets voted yes. The final count, 97% in favor. The Skalth made the decision easier by attacking Earth's moon base while the vote was being tallied. They killed 50,000 people, mostly children in educational facilities. The attack was broadcast live, another example of Skalth dominance. Walsh watched the broadcast with tears streaming down his face. Then he entered his authorization code to activate Protocol Sleeping Giant. Throughout human space, ancient facilities began receiving signals. On Earth in orbit around Mars, in the asteroid belt and the outer system, lights flickered on in installations that had been dark for 4 centuries. Massive structures that humanity had tried to forget started drawing power from fusion reactors that had waited patiently for this moment. In the region called the Iron Graveyards, where humanity had parked its old warships like museums, something changed. The museum pieces started moving. They oriented toward the nearest Skalth fleet positions. Owen sat in his quarters on Haven Colony and felt his holocom buzz. A message from an unknown military source. Report for civilian advisory position, Strategic Command, Earth. Transport leaves in 2 hours. He looked at Iris, who'd gotten the same message. She read hers twice. "They're giving me a ship," she said, sounding dazed. "A destroyer called Vindication. I've moved cargo for 20 years and they're giving me a warship." "Can you command it?" Iris looked at her hands. "I don't know." But I guess we're going to find out what 400 years of peace did to humanity's ability to fight. Owen gathered his belongings. As he walked to the transport, he passed a viewing screen showing the galaxy's news feeds. The coalition was debating sanctions. Other species were expressing concern. And the Skalth were laughing. Let them laugh, Owen thought. They wanted to hunt. They wanted to see what humanity was made of. In a few weeks, they'd get their answer. And Owen suspected they wouldn't enjoy the lesson. Nora stood in the archive vault beneath Geneva, surrounded by 4 centuries of carefully sealed secrets. The air tasted stale and old. Dust covered everything despite the preservation systems. Nobody had been down here since the protocols were established after the Unification War. Nobody wanted to remember what humans had done to each other. Are you sure about this? Her colleague Peter asked nervously. He kept glancing at the door like he wanted to run. The authorization came from the Prime Minister himself. Nora pulled open a file cabinet marked with biohazard symbols. Protocol Sleeping Giant grants access to everything. No restrictions. The files told a story more horror than history. During the Unification War, humanity had split into 3 factions fighting for control of Earth and the early colonies. The war lasted 12 years. When it ended, population had dropped from 12 billion to 4 billion. Entire regions were uninhabitable. The oceans glowed with radiation. But the casualty numbers weren't what made Nora's hands shake. It was the weapons descriptions, the casual way the reports mentioned erasing cities, the efficiency calculations for biological agents, the AI combat logs that showed machines learning to predict human behavior and exploit psychological weaknesses. They merged people with computers, Peter whispered, reading over her shoulder. Neural-linked soldiers, thought-controlled weapons. They turned themselves into living weapons. Nora found schematics for ships that could destroy planets, not bombs or missiles, but directed energy weapons that could crack a world's crust. Humanity had built 6 of them. All 6 had been used. 3 worlds in the outer system were still lifeless rocks because of it. No wonder they sealed this away, Peter said. We were monsters. We were desperate, Nora corrected. There's a difference. She'd been reading the personal logs, too. Soldiers who cried after battles. Scientists who begged their commanders not to deploy certain weapons. Civilians caught between factions who just wanted the war to end. The horror wasn't that humanity was naturally monstrous. It was that ordinary people had done monstrous things because they felt they had no choice. And now Protocol Sleeping Giant was bringing it all back. Nora's holocom buzzed. A message from Earth Defense Command, newly established. All archived weapon systems to be restored to operational status. Personnel with technical expertise report immediately. They're really doing this, Peter said. The Skalth killed 8 million people and counting. What else can we do? Nora spent the next week helping engineers understand technology that hadn't been touched in 400 years. The AI systems woke up slowly, running diagnostics and asking confused questions about why so much time had passed. The weapon systems were easier. They'd been built to last, and they'd waited patiently for someone to need them again. On Earth, the recruitment centers opened. Volunteers lined up for blocks. 400 million people in the first week from every colony. They ranged from teenagers to elderly citizens who remembered their grandparents' stories about the old days. Nobody wanted to fight. Everyone understood they had to. Owen arrived at Strategic Command Headquarters on day 9. Nora met him at the entrance, both of them feeling strange in the military facility that had been constructed in just over a week. You look tired, Owen said. I've been reading about biological weapons for 7 days straight. I can't sleep anymore. Nora led him through security checkpoints. They want you to head up Xenobiology Division. Specifically figuring out how to kill Skalth efficiently. Owen had expected this. He'd spent the transport flight preparing himself mentally. Where do I start? Wherever you want. You've got unlimited resources and authority. The only constraint is time. Owen set up his laboratory in what had been a museum dedicated to peace. The irony wasn't lost on him. He brought in samples from the attacks, what little biological material had been recovered. Skalth blood, tissue, chemical signatures. Everything told him more about what they were dealing with. The Skalth were apex predators who'd evolved on a deathworld. Their biology was optimized for hunting. Enhanced reflexes, redundant organs, chemical sensing that detected fear pheromones from across a battlefield. They were nearly perfect soldiers. Nearly. Everything has a weakness, Owen muttered, studying cellular structures. Just need to find yours. In orbit, the shipyards worked at impossible speeds. Nora watched through observation windows as ships took shape. Humanity had learned a lot about engineering in 4 centuries of peace. They took the old weapons and merged them with new efficiency. Ships that had taken years to build in the old days now took weeks. The flagship Retribution slid out of the construction bay 90 days after Protocol Sleeping Giant activated. Nora stood with her father and watched the massive vessel orient itself toward deep space. It was beautiful in a terrible way, all sharp angles and weapon ports. It looks hungry, Owen said quietly. It should. We built it to hunt. The training programs ran 20 hours a day. Ancient AIs, woken from their long sleep, taught humans how to fight again. The learning curves were steeper than anyone expected. 4 centuries of peace hadn't erased humanity's capacity for violence. It had just been sleeping. Nora volunteered for the experimental programs. They called it neural link, like the old soldiers used, a computer interface connected directly to the brain, allowing faster reactions and coordinated thinking. 50 pilots entered the program. Nora was one of them. The first time she connected to a fighter craft, she felt the ship like it was her own body. Every system, every weapon, every sensor. It was overwhelming and addictive, and exactly what humanity needed to face the Scout. The first naval battle came sooner than anyone expected. A Scout scouting fleet found a human supply convoy near the Haven colony. 20 Scout ships against 3 human escorts. By old coalition thinking, the humans should have run. They didn't run. Iris commanded one of the escorts, the destroyer Vindication. She'd spent 6 weeks learning naval combat from an AI that had fought in the Unification War. The AI taught her something the Coalition had forgotten. Chaos was a weapon. Scatter formation, Iris ordered as the Scout ships approached in their standard hunting pattern. The 3 human ships broke apart, moving in seemingly random directions. The Scout, who fought with hive mind coordination, struggled to track 3 unpredictable targets. They were used to prey that ran or surrendered, not prey that scattered and attacked from multiple angles. Vindication came around behind the Scout formation and fired missiles that bent through space using gravity distortion. The Scout shields were designed for direct energy weapons. The missiles passed through and detonated inside their hulls. 10 Scout ships died in the first minute. The remaining ships tried to adapt, but the human vessels never stayed still long enough. They dodged and weaved and fired from unexpected angles. Another AI lesson: predictability is death. When the battle ended, 30 Scout ships were debris, and all 3 human escorts had survived. Minor damage, no casualties. Commander Raxthor received the battle report on his flagship. He read it 3 times, then requested confirmation. The report didn't change. An inferior human force had destroyed a Scout hunting fleet using tactics that made no sense. They fight like they're insane, his tactical officer reported. No coordination, no pattern. It's chaos. No, Raxthor said slowly. It's organized chaos. There's a difference. He pulled up footage of the battle. They're not fighting like prey anymore. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted when news of the victory spread. Owen watched the feeds from his laboratory and felt nothing. One battle didn't mean victory. The Scout had thousands of ships. Humanity was learning to fight again, but learning took time. We need something else, he told Nora that evening. Something that levels the field faster. What are you thinking? Owen pulled up his research on Scout fear detection. They hunt by sensing terror. It's their primary targeting mechanism. What if we gave them something to be terrified of? Nora understood immediately. Biological warfare. Chemical warfare, technically. A compound that triggers their fear response. Make them experience what their victims feel. Owen met his daughter's eyes. It won't kill them. Just make them unable to fight. That's still a weapon of terror, Dad. Yes, Owen agreed. It is. And I'm going to build it anyway. Nora left without arguing. She understood the same thing Owen did. This was war. Not the clean, honorable kind from stories. The real kind where you used every advantage you had and worried about morality after you survived. In deep space, Commander Raxthor reported to the Scout Emperor Skarnix. The Emperor listened to the battle report with growing interest. The prey has teeth, Skarnix said, amused. How entertaining. Deploy the Reaver fleets. Show these humans what true predators look like. Raxthor bowed. As he left the throne room, he glanced at the battle footage one more time. Something about the way the human ships moved bothered him. They didn't fight like a species that had been peaceful for 4 centuries. They fought like something that had been caged and was now free. That should have been his first warning. The Skalth Reaver fleets had conquered 40 species across 3 centuries. They represented the pinnacle of Imperium military might. 600 ships organized into hunting packs, commanded by veterans who'd never lost a battle. When Emperor Skarnix deployed them against humanity, he expected the war to end within a month. Owen worked in his laboratory while the fleets approached, synthesizing compounds that shouldn't exist. He'd mapped the Skalth fear response down to individual neurons. Now he was building a chemical that would trigger every terror pathway simultaneously. It was elegant science in service of ugly necessity. Testing shows 0.03 parts per million is enough, his assistant Barry reported. Any higher and their nervous systems shut down completely. We're trying to terrify them, not kill them, Owen said. Though some nights when he remembered the recordings of human children being hunted, he wasn't sure he cared about the distinction. Is there a moral difference? Barry asked quietly. Owen didn't answer. He sealed the compound in delivery canisters and shipped them to Strategic Command, with instructions that made his hands shake while typing. This was his contribution to the war effort. Not healing or building or discovering, just finding better ways to hurt the enemy. Nora flew patrol missions around Earth. Her consciousness merged with a fighter craft designated Blade 7. The neural link had become natural now, almost comfortable. 49 other pilots flew in formation around her, their minds connected through quantum processors. When they moved, they flowed like a single organism. Reaver Fleet detected at Sector 9, command transmitted. All wings scramble. 50 fighters launched simultaneously. Nora felt the acceleration in her bones, felt the weapon systems arm themselves, felt the other pilots' thoughts touching the edges of her awareness. They weren't separate anymore. They were a swarm. The Skalth Reaver fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 200 ships all identical, moving with mechanical precision. They'd done this dance countless times before. Arrive, overwhelm, conquer. They're beautiful, one of the pilots whispered through the link. They're targets, Nora corrected. The human fleet met them between Earth and Mars. 40 ships, outnumbered 5-1. Admiral Ruth Sterling commanded from the Retribution. She'd been a logistics coordinator before the war, managing merchant vessel schedules. Now she coordinated death. Implement scatter pattern Delta, Sterling ordered. Make them chase ghosts. The human ships broke formation and scattered across 3-dimensional space. The Skalth, expecting standard battle lines, fired at where the ships had been. Energy beams cut through empty vacuum. Their tactics are outdated, Sterling's tactical officer reported. They're fighting like it's a century ago. They're fighting like they always win, Sterling corrected. First time facing an opponent who doesn't surrender. Exploit it. Nora's fighter wing dove through the Skalth formation at speeds that made the G-forces feel like being crushed. The neural link let them process information faster than human reflexes should allow. They fired in perfect synchronization. 50 missiles at 50 different targets. 20 Skalth ships exploded. Commander Raxthor watched from his flagship as the battle developed in ways his experience couldn't predict. The human ships moved erratically, never holding position long enough to target effectively. Their fighters flew in patterns that seemed suicidal until you realized each pilot was part of a larger coordination. They're linked somehow, his tactical officer said. Neural connections, possibly. Like our hive coordination, but voluntary. Can we jam it? We're trying. They're using quantum entanglement. Can't jam what isn't transmitting. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Skalth kept trying traditional tactics. Concentrate fire, overwhelm defenses, board and capture. Humanity kept doing things that shouldn't work. Ships would fake engine failures, then ambush the Skalth vessels that came to finish them. Fighters would appear to retreat, only to circle back from unexpected vectors. Owen's compound was deployed halfway through the battle. Missiles that looked like standard munitions but carried something worse than explosives. They detonated in proximity to Skalth ships, releasing a gas that passed through shields like they weren't there. The first Skalth crew to experience it stopped fighting. They didn't die. They just felt, for the first time in their species' history, the absolute terror that their prey experienced. Every fear pathway in their brains fired simultaneously. They saw threats that didn't exist. They felt death approaching from every direction. Ships drifted out of formation. Weapons stopped firing. The Reaver fleet, which had never retreated in 300 years, scattered and ran. "They're breaking," Sterling reported, sounding shocked. "The Skelth are actually running." Nora chased a fleeing destroyer and felt no satisfaction. Just exhaustion, and the knowledge that this would happen again, and again, until one side couldn't fight anymore. The battle ended with 80 Skelth ships destroyed and 200 retreating in disorder. Humanity lost 4 ships and took moderate damage across the fleet. By any measure, it was a stunning victory. Commander Raxthor sat in his command chair and stared at the casualty reports. 40% losses. His crews were still experiencing fear attacks, unable to function properly. The humans had weaponized terror itself. "Send a message to the Emperor," he said quietly. "Tell him the prey has become predator." Back on Earth, Owen watched the battle footage and felt sick. The Skelth ships fleeing in panic, crews screaming over open channels, soldiers experiencing engineered nightmares. He'd done this. His compound, his research, his contribution to the war. "We won," Barry said, trying to sound celebratory. "We committed atrocity with chemistry instead of bombs," Owen replied. "Winning doesn't make it noble." But the coalition finally noticed. Ambassador Velsharn, representing the Council, arrived at Earth a week later. The insectoid diplomat looked uncomfortable in human gravity. "The coalition wishes to discuss military cooperation," Velsharn began formally. Prime Minister Walsh, looking older and grayer than ever, leaned back in his chair. "You told us we weren't warriors anymore. You said we'd forgotten how to fight. We were mistaken." "Yes, you were." Walsh pulled up battle footage. "We didn't forget. We chose to stop. There's a profound difference. And now that we've started again, I'm not sure we can stop. The Skelth are a threat to everyone. Surely you see the value in—" "We see the value in protecting our own people," Walsh interrupted. "You watched 8 million humans die and sent diplomatic letters. Where was the coalition when Red Point burned?" Velsharn had no answer for that. "We'll fight the Skelth," Walsh continued. "Not for the coalition. For ourselves. You're welcome to handle your own defense." The ambassador left empty-handed. The footage of his departure spread across human space within hours. For the first time in 4 centuries, humanity had rejected coalition authority. They stood alone. Iris celebrated her second major victory the following week. Her destroyer group caught a Skelth supply convoy and destroyed it completely. She'd learned to love naval combat with an intensity that disturbed her during quiet moments. The targeting calculations, the tactical decisions, the moment when enemy ships exploded. It satisfied something deep and ugly in her psyche. "You're getting better at this," her executive officer commented. "At killing, you mean?" Iris studied the wreckage floating on her view screen. "Yes, I am. Disturbingly good." Strategic Command promoted her to fleet captain and gave her 6 more ships to command. They were forming battle groups now. Organized fleets designed to take the war to Skelth territory. Defense was over. Offense was beginning. Nora's neural link became permanent. The doctors couldn't safely remove it anymore without brain damage. She'd been connected too long, thought through the computer interface too many times. She was part of the ship now, and the ship was part of her. "Does it bother you?" Owen asked during one of their rare meetings. "No," Nora lied. "I'm more effective this way. I can process targeting data 10 times faster than baseline humans. In combat, that's the difference between living and dying. You sound like one of the reports from the Unification War. Soldiers who stopped being fully human. Maybe that's what it takes to win." Owen wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. His daughter had become something else. Not worse, not better, just different. Changed by war in ways that might never reverse. The Skelth Emperor Skarnix called a war council after receiving reports of the recent defeats. His generals argued among themselves, each blaming others for tactical failures. They'd never faced an opponent like humanity before. "They're not fighting honorably," General Krath complained. "They use terror weapons. They attack from unexpected angles. They don't follow any established combat doctrine." "Because they're writing their own doctrine," Skarnix said. "And it's working." He studied tactical maps showing Skelth losses. These humans were peaceful for 400 years. What happened to turn them into this? Nobody could answer. "Find out," the Emperor ordered, "and prepare the full armada. If they want war, we'll give them war. 1,000 ships. Everything we have. We'll end this at their homeworld." The order went out across Imperium space. Every available ship began moving toward human territory. The largest fleet in stealth history, assembled for one purpose: destroy Earth and break humanity's will to resist. Admiral Sterling received the intelligence report about the incoming armada and didn't flinch. She'd been preparing for this since the war began. Earth would be the final battle one way or another. Call back all battle groups, she ordered. Every ship, every fighter, every weapon system. If they want Earth, they'll have to go through all of us to get it. Owen sat in his laboratory and calculated how many people would die in the coming battle. The numbers were staggering regardless of who won. He'd created weapons of terror, but the stealth had something simpler: overwhelming numbers. We might lose this, he told Nora during their last conversation before she deployed. I know, Nora replied. Her eyes looked strange now, pupils dilated from the neural link. But at least we fought. At least we made them bleed. That was the difference between humanity now and humanity before the war. They'd learned that sometimes fighting and losing was better than surrendering without trying, even if it meant becoming something darker than they'd been. The Scouth Armada entered human space 3 weeks later, 1,000 ships moving toward Earth like an avalanche. Behind them, Commander Raxthor felt something he'd never experienced in 40 years of military service: uncertainty. The prey had teeth. The prey had claws. The prey had learned to hunt back. And now they'd see who was really the predator. 3 days before the Scouth Armada arrived, Owen stood at a viewport watching Earth rotate below. Blue and green and white, beautiful in ways that statistics and measurements could never capture. 12 billion people live down there now. He was trying not to calculate how many would die. You should evacuate, Nora said behind him. She'd come down from her fighter for what might be their last conversation. The neural link made her movement slightly off, like she was piloting a body instead of just inhabiting it. To where? If Earth falls, nowhere is safe. Owen turned to face his daughter. Besides, Strategic Command needs me to monitor the terror weapons. Make sure they deploy correctly. Make sure we traumatize the enemy effectively. Yes, that's what I've become. A man who specializes in weaponized fear. Owen laughed bitterly. Your mother would be horrified. Mom would understand we're fighting for survival. Nora's eyes flickered, the neural link processing information even during casual conversation. She'd hate what we're doing, but she'd understand why. They stood in silence for a while. Outside, the human fleet assembled in defensive positions. 200 ships against 1,000. The mathematics were straightforward and terrifying. I'm scared, Owen admitted. Good. Fear keeps us sharp. Nora hugged him awkwardly, like she'd forgotten how bodies pressed together. I need to get back to my fighter. We're doing final checks. After she left, Owen returned to his laboratory. Barry was running simulations of the terror compound's effectiveness against large-scale deployments. The numbers looked promising in a horrifying way. If we saturate the battle space with this stuff, their entire fleet will be non-functional within 20 minutes, Barry reported. Assuming they don't adapt. Assuming their biology doesn't develop resistance. Assuming we can deploy enough before they overwhelm us. Owen checked the ammunition counts. We have enough canisters for maybe 40% coverage. After that, it's conventional weapons. Conventional weapons won't be enough. I know. Admiral Sterling walked the corridors of the Retribution, inspecting crew stations and offering quiet words of encouragement. She'd learned that command wasn't about brilliant strategy. It was about making people believe they could win even when mathematics said otherwise. Admiral, the Scouth fleet just entered sensor range, her tactical officer reported. Sterling took her position on the bridge. Through the main viewport, she could see the distant specks of enemy ships. 1,000 vessels, each larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had built. They moved in precise formation, confident and unstoppable. All ships, this is Sterling. Hold positions and wait for my command. She switched to fleet-wide broadcast. I know what you're all thinking. We're outnumbered, outgunned. By conventional military logic, we should lose. She paused, letting that sink in. But we're not conventional. We spent 400 years being peaceful. And the galaxy thought that made us weak. They forgot that peace is a choice. War is just what happens when we stop choosing peace. Today the Scouth are going to learn what humans are like when we stop being nice. On Blade 7, Nora felt the words through her neural link. 50 other pilots shared the sensation, their consciousness brushing against each other in the quantum space between thoughts. They were ready. More than ready. They'd been training for this moment since the war began. "All fighters launch when ready," Sterling ordered. 50 neural-linked fighters launched from the Retribution. Another 100 conventional fighters launched from other ships. They formed a cloud of small, fast targets that scattered across three-dimensional space. The Scalth targeted them with point defense systems, but hitting a pilot who could think at computer speeds was like hitting smoke. The Scalth Armada approached Earth orbit in standard formation. Commander Raxthor commanded the center group, his flagship surrounded by 200 vessels. They'd conquered dozens of worlds with this exact approach. Overwhelming force, concentrated fire, systematic destruction. Humans deploying defensive positions, his tactical officer reported. Raxthor studied the formations. Something felt wrong. The human ships were positioned too far apart. No concentrated firepower, no defensive synergy. It looked like they were already preparing to scatter. "They're going to run again," he said. "When we engage, they'll break formation and force us to chase them across the system. We can't allow that. Full speed ahead, close to effective weapons range before they can scatter." The Scalth fleet accelerated. That was their first mistake. Nora and her wing dropped from high orbit, using Earth's gravity well to build velocity. They came down at the Scalth formation at speeds that blurred the edge of what human bodies could tolerate. The neural link compensated, adjusting blood flow and consciousness to keep them functional. "Target the command ships," Nora transmitted through the quantum link. "Cut off their coordination." 50 fighters moving as one mind launched missiles that bent through space. They weren't targeting hulls. They were targeting communication arrays, sensor clusters, the systems that let the Scalth fleet think collectively. 20 command ships went dark. The Scalth formation, which had moved with perfect precision, suddenly stumbled. Ships collided as coordination failed. They were used to fighting as a hive mind. When the hive fractured, they struggled to operate independently. "Now," Sterling said quietly, the human fleet, positioned in seemingly random locations, suddenly revealed their strategy. Every ship had been placed at a calculated vector. When they all fired simultaneously, their weapons didn't just hit the Scalth fleet. They hit the same points from multiple angles, concentrating force in ways that seemed impossible. It was like watching a three-dimensional puzzle solve itself through violence. The Scalth shields, designed to defend against frontal assault, collapsed under crossfire. 30 ships exploded in the first volley. Owen watched from strategic command as the battle unfolded. "Deploy the terror weapons. All canisters, maximum dispersion." Missiles streaked toward the Scalth fleet. They looked like standard munitions until they reached proximity and released their cargo. Gas spread through the vacuum, thin but potent. It touched Scalth shields and passed through like they didn't exist. The fear hit the Scalth crews in waves. They'd spent their entire civilization as apex predators. Fear was something they inflicted, not experienced. Now, for the first time, they felt it. Pure, unfiltered, chemically induced terror. Ships veered off course as their crews panicked. Weapons fired wildly at imagined threats. Some vessels shut down completely. Crews too traumatized to function. "The formation is collapsing," Raxthor reported to Emperor Skarnix. "The humans are using some kind of psychological weapon. Our crews are experiencing fear responses we've never documented." "Fear?" The Emperor sounded confused. "Our species doesn't experience fear." "We do now." Iris led her battle group in close-range assault. 6 destroyers against 50 Scalth cruisers should have been suicide. But the Scalth were disorganized now, each ship fighting independently. Iris picked them apart one at a time, using speed and maneuverability that the heavier Scalth vessels couldn't match. "This is for Red Point," she whispered, targeting another ship. "This is for Meridian 7, this is for every colony you burned." Her weapons fired. Another Scalth ship became debris. The battle raged for 8 hours. It was chaos and coordination in equal measure. Human ships darted in and out of weapons range. Neural-linked fighters moved in patterns that seemed random, but combined into devastating effectiveness. The terror weapons kept spreading, keeping the Scalth fleet in a state of chemical panic. Nora's fighter took damage from a lucky shot that shattered her port wing. The neural link compensated, making the damaged fighter fly like it was whole. She kept fighting, kept coordinating with the other pilots, kept pushing the Scalth back. "I'm hit," another pilot transmitted. "Blade 23 going down." "Copy that." "Your sacrifice matters." Nora felt the other pilot's consciousness wink out. Through the link, they all felt it. Death shared across 50 minds. But they kept fighting. Commander Raxthor realized they were going to lose hours before the battle ended. The humans fought with a combination of calculation and savagery that his species couldn't counter. Every tactic the Scalth tried was anticipated and exploited. Every advantage they had was turned against them. "Request permission to retreat," he transmitted to Emperor Skarnix. The Emperor's reply was icy. "The Scalth Imperium does not retreat." "Then the Scalth Imperium will lose its entire armada." Long silence. "Then, do what you must." The retreat order spread through the fleet. The surviving ships, maybe 600 of them, turned and fled toward the edge of the system. Some didn't make it. Human fighters chased them down, picking off stragglers with cold efficiency. When the last Scalth vessel jumped to faster-than-light speed, silence fell across the battlefield. Debris floated everywhere. The space around Earth looked like a graveyard. "Status report," Sterling said, her voice hoarse. "We lost 30 ships, 3,000 casualties. Another 12 ships damaged but repairable." Her tactical officer paused. "Enemy losses estimated at 400 ships. The remainder fled." Sterling closed her eyes. They'd won. Somehow, against impossible odds, humanity had won, but the cost made her want to weep. Owen watched the aftermath from his laboratory. Ships broadcasting requests for rescue, escape pods floating in the void, bodies and wreckage mixing together in the cold of space. This was victory. This was what winning looked like. "We did it," Barry said, trying to sound happy. "Yes, we became exactly what the galaxy feared we might be." Owen pulled up the casualty lists. 3,000 dead on their side. Estimated 20,000 on the Scalth side. Numbers that would haunt him forever. Nora landed her damaged fighter and disconnected from the neural link. The separation felt like tearing away part of her consciousness. She stumbled on the hangar deck, caught by ground crew who looked at her with something like awe. "You okay, pilot?" "No," Nora said honestly. "I don't think I'll ever be okay again." Iris sat in her command chair long after the battle ended, staring at the empty space where enemy ships had been. She'd killed hundreds, maybe thousands of Scalth today. Each decision had been tactical, necessary, justified. But justified didn't mean easy. Justified didn't mean she could forget. "Captain?" Her executive officer touched her shoulder gently. "We should dock for repairs." "Yes, repairs." Iris forced herself to stand. "Because there will be more battles. This wasn't the end." She was right. In Scalth territory, Emperor Skarnix stared at casualty reports and felt something new for his species. Uncertainty. The humans had beaten his best fleet, defeated his most experienced commanders, turned his hunters into hunted. But the Emperor hadn't survived 3 centuries by accepting defeat. If humanity wanted war, he'd give them war. But next time, he'd come prepared for an enemy who didn't fight fair. Next time, he'd bring everything. The war didn't end with the Battle of Earth. It continued for another 6 months, spreading across the border regions between human and Scalth space. Iris led deep strike missions into Imperium territory, targeting supply depots and military installations. Each mission was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum casualties. Humanity had learned to fight, but they'd also learned to be efficient about it. Owen stopped counting the deaths after the first 100,000. The numbers became abstract, meaningless in their enormity. He focused on his work instead, developing new compounds, refining the terror weapons, finding better ways to break the Scalth will to fight without necessarily killing them. Some nights he wondered if that distinction mattered. Terror was its own kind of death. Nora flew mission after mission, her consciousness more connected to the neural link than to her physical body. The other pilots started calling her Ghost because she'd become so detached, so purely functional. She didn't mind the nickname. Emotions felt distant now, processed through computer logic instead of experienced directly. The turning point came at the Battle of the Thorngate Nebula. Iris had tracked Commander Raxthor to a staging area where the Scalth were assembling another invasion fleet. Instead of calling for reinforcements, she led her battle group directly into enemy territory. "This is insane," her executive officer protested. "We're outnumbered 3-1. "They always outnumber us," Iris replied calmly. "That's why we cheat." They hit the staging area at full acceleration, weapons firing before the Scalth even registered their presence. The nebula's gas clouds interfered with sensors, giving the human ships precious seconds of surprise. Iris used those seconds to cripple 20 vessels before they could raise shields. But this time the Scalth were ready. Raxthor had studied human tactics obsessively since the Battle of Earth. He understood now that humans thrived on chaos. So he did something unexpected. He withdrew his forces into a tight defensive formation and waited. He's not chasing us, Iris realized. He learned. For the first time, a Scouth commander fought defensively. He gave up the initiative, accepted local losses, and forced the humans to come to him. It should have been a brilliant counter-strategy. It might have worked against anyone else. Iris looked at her tactical display and smiled coldly. If he wants to huddle together, let's give him a reason to regret it. Launch the boarding craft. 20 small ships, barely armed but fast, accelerated toward the Scouth defensive position. They looked like suicide runs until they got close enough to deploy their real payload. Humans trained in close-quarters combat. The boarding parties hit 3 Scouth capital ships simultaneously. Iris led one team personally, moving through corridors with a rifle that felt wrong in her hands. She'd spent 20 years moving cargo. Now she moved through enemy ships like death incarnate. The Scouth crew fought back, but they were optimized for ship-to-ship combat. Hand-to-hand fighting in cramped corridors against opponents who'd learned violence from historical archives and improved on it? They struggled. Iris reached the bridge of Raxthor's flagship and found the commander waiting with 2 guards. They stared at each other across 10 meters of deck plating. "You're the merchant captain," Raxthor said. "The one who destroyed my supply depot." "Former merchant captain." Iris raised her rifle. "Surrender. You've lost. We never surrender. That's not our way." "Then you die. That's not complicated." Raxthor studied her for a long moment. "What happened to your species?" "You were peaceful. The galaxy thought you were weak. We were peaceful. We were never weak. There's a difference you should have learned." Iris kept her weapon steady. "Peace is hard. War is easy. You forced us to choose the easy option." The commander's guards moved to attack. Iris shot them both with precision that would have impressed her younger self. Then she pointed the rifle at Raxthor. "Last chance. Surrender or die." Raxthor reached for his weapon. Iris fired first. The commander fell, and with him, the last organized resistance in the Thorngate Nebula collapsed. The Scouth fleet scattered. Some ships tried to fight and were destroyed. Others ran and were chased down. By the time the battle ended, the Scouth staging area was rubble and prisoners. Emperor Skarnix received the news in his throne room, surrounded by advisors who'd never experienced defeat before. They didn't know how to process what was happening. The Scouth Imperium had conquered dozens of species. Now one species was conquering them. "We need to negotiate," his chief advisor said carefully. "Negotiate?" The Emperor sounded like the word was foreign. "We're predators. Predators don't negotiate with prey. But they're not prey anymore. Maybe they never were." The advisor pulled up battle reports. "Every engagement we lose. Every tactic we try, they counter. They're better at war than we are." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, Skarnix spoke. "Open a channel to the human leadership. Offer unconditional surrender." The message reached Earth 3 days later. Prime Minister Walsh read it twice, then called an emergency meeting of human leadership. Owen attended as civilian advisor. Iris joined via holocom from her flagship. Nora was there in person, looking more machine than human now. "They're surrendering," Walsh said. "Complete unconditional. They'll withdraw from all conquered territories, pay reparations, submit to monitoring, everything we could ask for." "And we won," Owen said quietly. "We actually won." Nobody celebrated. They'd won, yes, but the cost had been staggering. 15 million human casualties. Entire colonies damaged or destroyed. A generation traumatized by war, and humanity itself had changed in ways that couldn't be reversed. "What do we do now?" Walsh asked. "We accept the surrender," Iris said from her holocom. "Then we make sure everyone in the galaxy understands. Attacking humanity was a mistake. Make them afraid to try again." "That makes us the villains," Owen protested. "Maybe, but we'll be alive villains." Iris didn't flinch. "The Coalition abandoned us. The galaxy watched us burn. Now they're terrified of us. Good. Let them be scared." The formal surrender ceremony took place in neutral space. Emperor Skarnix, humbled and diminished, signed documents that gave humanity control over Scouth military capabilities. The Imperium would disarm. They'd release all conquered species. They'd become, in effect, a protectorate under human supervision. Owen watched the ceremony and felt nothing. Victory should have meant something. Instead, it just felt empty. "We proved we could fight," he said to Nora afterward. "Was it worth it? 8 million dead if we hadn't fought. Extinction if we'd lost." Nora's eyes flickered with neural link activity. Worth is a calculation. The alternative was worse. "You sound like a computer." "I am part computer now. That's what war made me." After the surrender, the coalition approached humanity again. This time they didn't ask for cooperation. They proposed something else, voluntary isolation. A buffer zone around human space. Trade would continue. Diplomatic relations would remain, but human military vessels would stay in human territory. Ambassador Velsharn presented the proposal personally to Prime Minister Walsh. "You're quarantining us," Walsh said flatly. "We're recognizing reality. Your species is efficient at violence in ways that frighten the rest of the galaxy. The Skalth were apex predators for 3 centuries. You defeated them in 6 months." Velsharn's translator conveyed discomfort. "We respect what you accomplished. We're also terrified of it." Walsh studied the proposal. It was reasonable, even generous under the circumstances. Humanity would keep its independence, its territory, its sovereignty. They'd just be isolated from the broader galactic community. "And if we refuse? Then every species in the coalition will unite against you. We're more afraid of you than we ever were of the Skalth." Walsh signed the agreement. Humanity withdrew to its own space. The weapons stayed active this time. The shipyards kept building. The training programs continued. Just in case. Owen retired to a colony world on the outer rim, far from Earth and its reminders of war. He built a small laboratory and went back to studying alien plants. Sometimes he could go hours without thinking about the terror weapons he'd created. Sometimes. Barry visited once, checking on his old mentor. They sat on Owen's porch and watched local wildlife move through the gardens. "Do you regret it?" Barry asked. "What we did? Every day. But I'd do it again if I had to." Owen poured them both drinks. "That's what makes it worse. Knowing I'd create those weapons again, knowing I'd hurt people again because the alternative was watching my species die. That's war, choosing between bad options and worse ones." "Yes, and we're very good at making those choices now." Iris stayed in the military, rising to admiral and taking command of the border fleets. Someone had to guard against the next threat. Someone had to remember that peace was temporary and violence was always waiting. She visited the memorials sometimes, reading names of people who'd died under her command. The list kept growing in her memory. Nora never fully disconnected from the neural link. The doctor said she could, theoretically, but the integration was too deep. She'd lose parts of herself trying to remove it. So she stayed connected, living half in her body and half in the quantum space between machines. The military kept her on active status, using her as a trainer for new neural link pilots. "Does it hurt?" a young recruit asked during training. "No," Nora lied. "You get used to it." The truth was different. It hurt constantly, a low ache where human consciousness met artificial processing, but she'd accepted the pain as part of who she'd become. A weapon, a tool, a human who'd given up part of her humanity to protect the rest. 5 years after the war ended, Owen received a visitor. Ambassador Trill, the one who'd been eaten by Commander Raxthor, except it wasn't that Trill. It was his successor appointed to replace him. "I wanted to meet the human who created the terror weapons," Trill said. "To understand your psychology." Owen poured the ambassador a drink compatible with his biology. "I'm just a scientist who was desperate. You're the reason the Skalth surrendered. The fear you weaponized broke them more effectively than your military victories." Trill studied Owen carefully. "Does that satisfy you?" "Nothing about the war satisfies me. But we survived. That's enough. The coalition underestimated humanity. We thought 400 years of peace had changed your nature. We were wrong." Trill finished his drink. "Peace didn't change you. It was just a choice you made. And when you needed to, you chose differently." After Trill left, Owen stood at his window and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy continued turning. Species traded and talked and lived their lives, and they gave human ships a wide berth when they passed. Humanity had proven what they were capable of. They'd woken the sleeping war machines and used them efficiently. The cost had been terrible, but the alternative was extinction. So they paid the price and lived with the consequences. Prime Minister Walsh gave one final speech on the 10th anniversary of Protocol Sleeping Giants activation. He stood before a memorial listing all the casualties, both human and stealth. We proved we could fight. We proved we could win. We proved we could be as ruthless and efficient as any warrior species in the galaxy. Walsh paused, looking at the names. Now we must prove we can choose peace again. Not because we're weak, not because we're afraid, but because we're strong enough to make that choice. The speech was broadcast across human space. Some people believed it. Others remembered the war too well. The weapons stayed active just in case. The shipyards kept building. Humanity watched the stars and waited to see if anyone else would make the mistake of attacking them. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The sleeping war machines could wake up, and once awake, they were terrifyingly effective. Better to leave humanity alone. Better to respect the buffer zone and remember that peace was a gift, not a guarantee. Owen died 15 years after the war ended, old and tired and haunted by memories of terror weapons. His last words were to Nora, who sat by his bedside with her neural link active. "Did we do the right thing?" he asked. "We survived. That's all any species can do." Nora held her father's hand, feeling the warmth fade. "Sleep now. The war is over." But she knew the truth. The war was never really over. It just slept, waiting for the next threat that would wake it again. And when that happened, humanity would remember what they'd learned. That peace was a choice, war was easy, and sometimes survival required becoming the thing you feared. The sleeping war machines would wake again when needed. That was their purpose. That was their curse. That was the price humanity paid for surviving in a galaxy where kindness only mattered to kind species. And humanity had learned, finally and completely, that they were only as kind as they chose to be.